All right, our notes for today go along with chapter 12 of the book, all about the American West, the challenges and the opportunities that opened up for lots of different groups of Americans as they moved out west in the 1800s. Even before the Civil War, a lot of settlers were already starting to move out west. And in this time period, west didn't mean necessarily California, but to the western side of the Mississippi River. So going west of the Mississippi and going out into the Great Plains and farther was sort of going out into the unknown. People that did this were pretty brave to take their lives and go out into an unknown area, not really sure what would happen. So why would they do such a thing? Because of the opportunities that were available in the West. A lot of this westward expansion starts, as you guys already knew, through the gold rush. So one of the first big groups of settlers that goes out to the West were miners who were rushing out to California. They heard that gold was found in California and wanted to strike it rich. So the gold rush starts in 1848, and lots of people are moving out there. So over the next decade, from 1850 to 1860, California becomes a much more populated state. The population of the state really explodes, and you start to get cities like San Francisco that had been kind of a little outpost turn into big major cities. And then after the Civil War, between 1865 and 1900, most of the rest of the West gets settled. A lot of the areas that had been territories starts to see more and more groups move out there and settle down and start a life for themselves. Another reason people moved out west was because the government encouraged it. How did they do this? Well, one was through things like the Homestead Act, okay, where the government was giving out essentially free land. You could get a large chunk of land, and all you really had to do with the Homestead Act was pay a small fee for some paperwork and then live and work on that land for a period of 5 years. Well, if you're someone who's struggling to make it in the cities in the East, New York, Philadelphia, for example, Washington, D.C., Baltimore, Atlanta, that probably sounds like a pretty good deal, right? So the government's encouraging through the Homestead Act. The government also gave out land to railroad companies, large chunks of land, to encourage them to build railroads, which is going to help the settlers, right? Having to go over land took a long time and was very difficult. If you could take railroads out to the West, that made it a lot easier. And not everything that the government did to encourage Western settlement was positive, okay? Because as we know, the government took action in driving Native Americans off the land and onto set areas called reservations that were set aside for native tribes, which are often not really the best areas. So the government's doing these things to encourage people to move out west. Another reason moving out west was a little bit easier, a little bit more exciting, and opened the door to opportunities had to do with technology. New technologies not only made it easier to get west, but once you got there, they helped make the farms more profitable, more productive. You could grow more, you could make more money. So you had new machines, right, like mechanical reapers, that greatly cut down the amount of time it took to harvest an acre of land. With these machines, it would take you about 3 hours to harvest an acre of crops instead of about 60. Obviously makes you much more profitable, much more productive. Because of this, wheat production in the United States shoots up. Over a 30-year period, the amount of wheat that's grown in the United States goes from 250 million bushels to 680 million bushels. That's almost 3 times the amount of wheat. And it wasn't just wheat. There were other crops that were being produced as well. And these farm products were really how the United States was making its money in this time period. 75% of the goods that we shipped out and sold to other countries were farm products, crops like wheat, cotton. So obviously the open, fertile lands of the West were a way to make a lot of money. But as we know, with opportunity also comes challenges and different negative impacts. Native Americans should be the first thing that pops into your mind when you think about the negative impacts of the West, settling the West. Native Americans lost their hunting grounds. They were driven off of the lands that they had worked and hunted on for a long time. And that really, really threatened their way of life. Building the railroads and creating these farms was a lot of really hard work. And especially on the railroads, many people died, right? Building the railroads was tough. And also, you got to think, as we're moving out, we're running into conflicts with Native American groups. It wasn't necessarily the safest thing to do to move out west. And there were all kinds of conflicts, as the book talks about. Settlers versus Indians. Farmers versus ranchers, right? Ranchers wanted to move their cattle through areas, but then you had farmers who were blocking off farms and keeping the ranchers from moving their cows. You had farmers competing with the railroads and running into conflict with the railroads over land. So it wasn't that everybody was, getting along. It also wasn't guaranteed that you would be successful, right? Many people went broke trying to move out west or died, as we said, through these conflicts. And even though the Civil War was over, even though there was a lot of opportunity in the West for African Americans, there was still racism. There was still discrimination. And so, these are some examples of how moving out west wasn't all opportunity, right? There was also conflict as well.